Ya puedes comenzar.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon everyone. Bienvenidos al webinar de lanzamiento global de la nueva aplicación web de retos. Before starting, antes de comenzar, quiero informarles de algunos aspectos importantes. Hay traducción simultánea español-inglés. There's simultaneous interpretation, Spanish-English for those who need to hear or speak in one single language. Pueden seleccionar el canal correspondiente en el icono del mundo abajo donde dice Interpretation. Solo va a haber traducción simultánea en este y no en los otros dos. Habiendo dicho esto, continúo. Este es el lanzamiento, el primer webinar de lanzamiento global de la nueva aplicación web de retos, Readiness Evaluation Tool for All Spills, y de la Guía Internacional para la Evaluación de la Planificación y Preparación de la Respuesta a derrame de hidrocarburos. Soy Miguel Moyano, soy Senior Managing Director de ARPEL y tengo el placer de ser el presentador de este webinar. Como comentario logístico, las preguntas se realizarán al final por escrito, van a encontrar abajo en el área de Q&A y pueden escribirlas en ambos idiomas, español o inglés. Voy a hacer una breve reseña histórica para que entendamos la importancia de estas dos herramientas en el proceso de la planificación y preparación de la respuesta a derrames. En la medida que aumentó la conciencia que representa el riesgo de derrames en el medio ambiente terrestre y acuático, así como la experiencia del personal de las agencias gubernamentales, los países establecieron requisitos legales para la prevención y la respuesta a derrames y se incrementó el número de planes y el nivel de sofisticación de estos planes. Hasta hace unos 20 años, la mayoría de los esfuerzos nacionales y de la industria se enfocaron en la preparación y en la mejora de los planes de respuesta, y se reconoció el valor de los ejercicios y los simulacros en la prueba de conceptos o de preparativos para la respuesta a derrames. En ese entonces no había una estructura formal diseñada para funcionar como lista de verificación y con la cual se pudieran comparar los resultados de una evaluación de preparación de la respuesta a derrames. O por lo menos no era algo internacionalmente aceptado. Fue recién en 2008 que se hizo una primera propuesta de una guía para la evaluación de la capacidad de respuesta para que una organización, empresa, identificara las áreas técnicas, políticas, legales o administrativas en las que tenía fortalezas, las áreas que requerían atención adicional o aquellas que simplemente no estaban desarrolladas. Esta guía proporcionó un resumen exhaustivo de muchos componentes y elementos previstos en un sistema de evaluación de la planeación y preparación para la respuesta a emergencias. Pero la comunidad internacional de gestión de derrames entendía que se precisaba una herramienta más amigable y fue así que ARPEL desarrolló retos en 2011. Retos, Readiness Evaluation Tool for Oil Spills, proporcionaba un conjunto completo de criterios para que la industria y los gobiernos evaluaran sus preparativos y la planificación para la respuesta a derrames de hidrocarburos a través de una serie de listas de verificación, utilizando a la guía como base de conocimiento para cerrar las brechas encontradas durante la evaluación. Desde su desarrollo en el 2011, Retos ha sido utilizado por gobiernos y empresas en más de 100 países en todo el mundo, y fue así que, dada su gran aceptación internacional, ARPEL, la Organización Marítima Internacional e IPIECA decidieron patrocinar la actualización de la herramienta Retos y su transición a una aplicación basada en la web, y el desarrollo de una guía internacional para la evaluación de la planificación y preparación de la respuesta a derrames de hidrocarburos. Los detalles de este proceso y de estas herramientas van a ser presentados hoy por el doctor Elliot Taylor, consultor principal responsable del desarrollo de retos y la guía internacional. Aunque seguramente no precisa de una introducción formal, ya que todos conocen a este experto internacional, Elliot es un reconocido consultor con un doctorado en oceanografía en la Universidad de Texas A&M y es científico principal y senior de Polaris Applied Science. Elliot tiene más de 35 años de experiencia en respuesta a derrames y fue asesor técnico para el programa de respuesta costera en el derrame de Deepwater Horizon. Como consultor reconocido por la OMI, ha dirigido talleres y actividades internacionales de la OMI-OPRC en capacitación, planificación y evaluación de la capacidad de respuesta en el Caribe, América del Sur y Central, la región del Mediterráneo y África. Y también ha desarrollado programas integrales de preparación ante derrames para operaciones internacionales en América del Norte, América del Sur, África, Medio Oriente y Rusia. Con esta breve introducción, entonces, Elliot, te paso la palabra y escuchamos.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Miguel, and good day to everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you, and appreciate your interest in this webinar and the tools that we'll be presenting here. This webinar provides a look into the collaborative work that's been undertaken during the past couple of years, and even before that, to enhance guidance tools for the assessment of oil spill response planning and preparedness programs. And so this is a brief look into the RETOS experience. Some of you may be familiar already with the RETOS tools and the international guides, or if you use them. So for some of you, this may be just a refresher and an update. For others, I hope the presentation gives you an appreciation of the tools that are available to you to undertake assessments in a standardized and consistent manner. So I'd like to start off with just a brief overview of some of the key messages that come from this presentation. I think the key takeaways are, first of all, that the RETOS tool, this is an online tool, has been updated and moved from what were Excel tables and an application that was based on Excel files over to a web-based application. That makes it a little easier for the international community to use. Importantly, also, the 2008 International Oil Spill Conference Guide, which was a proposed guide for oil spill response planning and assessment, has been updated and now endorsed, updated through the effort of IPICA, IMO, and ARPEL, and transformed into the international guide on assessment. And importantly, too, these two tools, the RETOS tool and the new 2003 International Guide, are now completely aligned. Whereas previously there was a little disconnect, they are now very much aligned. It makes it a lot easier for users to avail themselves of both tools. And importantly, the work that's been done, particularly over the last few years, really represents an effort, a combined effort from multiple experts representing global institutions and companies. The knowledge and the experience of these task force members were very instrumental in the review and the updates to the guide and the foundation for which the RETOS tool is developed. And furthermore, the same working groups went through the criteria in the RETOS application to make sure that those were updated and reflected best practices and some of the knowledge gained over the past years. So this really represents an international tool that's been developed and provided to the community. So how did we get here? One of the things that prompted all of this is the desire and the need for institutions, organizations, companies to assess and understand where their level of preparedness is. What guidance was available, what was checklists, what type of reference materials were available to ensure that your program met best practices and met standards. Clearly, regulations defined a lot of what has to be in place, but many want to go beyond the regulations and importantly, understand in context of their neighbors, in context of other potential spill sources and risks, where their strengths and opportunities for improvement lie. And so in developing these tools, the organizers for the International Oil Spill Conference in 2007 convened a working group to brainstorm really what goes into a comprehensive program around oil spill planning and preparedness. That initiative, that work that was done through this working group, again, an international collaboration, put together a listing and a comprehensive document on what goes into oil spill preparedness programs. And that was presented at the 2008 International Oil Spill Conference in Savannah, Georgia, as one of as the first rollout of something that the international community could use to consider what goes into a fully developed program. The feedback from that initiative led into the 2010 effort led by RPEL, with support from the Canadian International Development Agency, to transform what was written into a document, a 100-page document with very detailed about what goes into a spill response program, put it into something that's maybe a little easier to use, something that's a little more palatable for the community to be able to work through when doing assessments. And what that really gave, that was the birthplace then for the RETOS application itself. So based on that foundation of the 2008 international guidance, the RETOS application, the RETOS Excel tables were developed and rolled out in 2010. That, for those of you that remember, that was the year of Deepwater Horizon. And so there are many activities going on at that time. There was a lot of feedback received after the initial rollout, and so there was an ensuing activity led by RPEL with the IOC to upgrade the initial RETOS application, the Excel tables, into the next version. And that version was rolled out in 2014 and included several upgrades, one of which was to include critical criteria, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the basic level. But importantly, also, the update provided two reports. One was a global performance analysis, and the other a global improvement program. And so those two reports become very instrumental in what the users can use on the back end. And then in 2023, through the IPICA, IMO, and RPEL joint initiative, the international guide was updated. There were a lot of lessons learned following following Deepwater Horizon. There's been a lot of new guidance and recommended practices that have been issued since that time. And so it was really time to bring those and include those considerations and concepts into an updated international guide. But by updating that international guide, then we also wanted to update the criteria as applicable in the RETOS application, an initiative led by RPEL with support from IPICA and IMO, and also transform the Excel tables over to a web app. So this is the timeline that we've gone through in just the last 16 years, and the updates that have happened over just the past couple of years. So the one big deliverable is this transformation of the proposed international guidelines into the now 2003 guidelines. These help organizations identify technical, policy, legal, or administrative areas that are strongly developed, or areas that may need additional attention, or those that are not developed. And the guide itself provides the knowledge base and the framework for undertaking an assessment. And it importantly provides that base for the RETOS application itself, the checklist approach to doing an assessment. And when we think about the guide, it considers the various aspects of that go into spill planning and preparedness, starting with planning itself. What is out there, what needs to be done in context of compliance, what sort of risk assessments have been done, what are the strategies around the results of those risk assessments, how are the plans developed, how are they implemented, do you have the resources, do you have training, have you tested competency? And then importantly, of course, the sustained readiness. How do you keep checking yourself and improving your program? And all of these phases, of course, play across the board, whether it's in management, whether it's in operations, it's the evaluation process. So that international guide pulls all of these together. And the guide itself is structured around 10 categories. Through that brainstorming effort that was done back leading up to the 2008 guidelines, there was one of the big challenges: how do you organize this and make it presentable? And so we ended up with the 10 categories you see here: legislation, contingency planning, response coordination, health and safety, operational response, tracking, assessment, information management, logistics, finance and administrative considerations, training and exercises, and sustainability and improvement. So those 10 categories are the core of the international guide, and they also are the same 10 categories that you see in the RETOS application over and over again. And within those 10 categories, then those themes are then broken down into elements. And in the guide, we have 29 elements under each of these categories. And you can see these described here in more detail. Legislation can speak to international agreements, can speak to local legislation and regulations, contingency planning, whether those are resources at risk, spill analysis, risk minimization, etc. And so for each one of these categories, there's elements. And for each element, then there's a series of considerations that go into what goes into an oil spill response planning preparedness program. And just to elaborate on this a little bit, again, the RETOS application itself, when you go through the checklist, they reflect these same 10 categories, these same 29 elements as you go through. The guide itself also includes an appendix, which is a checklist on what may be part or considered as material for an oil spill response plan. So within each category, then, and within each of the elements, what's important is that we've identified who you might approach to find that information. If you're doing an assessment, who would have the information? Is it a regulatory agency? Is it a natural resource manager? Is it industry? What are the sub-elements that go into it? And then importantly, what are the links between different elements and sub-elements, and what references are available to you to further investigate and further understand each one of these aspects within the international guide. So really, there's like 4 levels in the collective set. You have categories, you have the elements, sub-elements, and then clarifying items within each one. So all total, there's more than 650 factors that go into the international guide. So you can see how it might be a bit daunting for someone to take a document that has over 650 factors and build those into an approach to undertake an assessment. Just as an example of one of the categories and elements within a category, you have here, for instance, exercises and training. This is element 27 within the list. And specifically for exercises, for instance, then you have a description of what goes into it, who might have the information, who to approach, oil industry, national plans, what's required, what are some of the sub-elements that might be included, such as, are there requirements, are there adopted standards, what are the types of frequency and frequency of exercises, what's the process, etc. And within each of these sub-elements, and there's further descriptions. So when one works through the international guide, you're presented with this information, and you're presented also with a toolbox. And the toolbox you see there are references that speak to that particular element. And in most, over 95% of the references are hyperlinked. So they point you to actual documents that you can refer to online when you're looking for more information about a particular topic. And there are over 500 references that are available to the users in going through these steps. The appendix, as I mentioned, has the checklist for what might go into oil spill response plans. These are based and built upon the guidance that was published by RPEL for national plans and IPCA guidance, which again was updated just in the past few years, and then cross-reference to IMO guidance for whether it's local plans, national plans, or multilateral plans. And those are the yellow highlights, the IMO criteria. But this provides users of mechanisms to go through and then assess in their actual contingency plans whether some of the material's been met or is included here. But importantly, when we're doing an evaluation, we are not just evaluating a plan, we are evaluating a response program. So it includes more than what is just in a plan itself. And that's important to keep in mind always. So the international guide itself provides this list of elements and sub-elements, but it's intended to be flexible. Not all programs are going to be mature enough to perhaps or even need to consider all aspects of what's folded into the international guide. That's really up to the users, and it's not intended to be prescriptive either. This provides the foundation for consideration of what goes into your programs. And of course, the more sophisticated program, the more mature it is, the greater number of elements that would probably be included in there, and the more specificity that goes into different aspects of the response program itself. That's what's important. But now, with that foundation of the international guidance for assessment, let's turn our eyes over now to the RETOS application itself, because that is really a distillation of the information that's in that international guide. And so the RETOS application, which I said now is available on the web, and you can see the web address there. It's just simply retos.app. So it's you can access it easily on a laptop, on a tablet, on a phone, although that can be tricky. And what you have is the first thing that shows up for you is a page which asks you to basically log in, and that is provide an email, provide a password, and then sign up. If some of you may have already been using it, so you're already signed in, but for others that are first time, you're just signing up. And that gets you into the application itself. And as I mentioned beforehand, the application is really going to walk you and guide you through a list of criteria, but they're the same 10 categories that are in the international guide. And they're provided as a series of checklists. The checklists are set up by levels, level A, B, and C, with level A being the more fundamental level, a basic level, B an intermediate level, and C a much more advanced level or more mature program would going through the assessment process. And as I mentioned beforehand, one of the updates that was done in 2014 was to have these reports, the Global Performance Analysis and Global Improvement Program reports, generated as part of the application itself. So when you use the RETOS application, one of the things that you will be asked to do initially when you set this up is to identify what scope of program you're assessing. Are you government or industry, and are you assessing a facility program? Or are you assessing a facility asset operations, such as a pipeline or vessel or fleet? These are geographically broader, much more broader in context than a particular facility, which is fixed. We know where the risks are. If you're looking at a government program, maybe your response program entails a city or port. It can be an area program, such as a province. In the US, we have area programs that encompass multiple states, for instance, or it might be a government national or international bilateral program that you're looking at. And then industry, it could be a country or business line program, spill response program that you're looking at, or a corporate spill response program. So these are the 7 scopes. So when you open up the application itself and you use it, and you're going to start doing an assessment, one of the first questions is, which of these scopes are you going to use? And that is also spelled out in the RETOS manual. The manual that is developed and comes with the application gives you definitions and examples of what the different scopes are. It explains a lot of the terms that are used in the RETOS application itself and how the evaluation process works, how the scoring works, for instance. The tool itself is the one that you're going to step through and do the evaluation, and it's going to generate those 2 reports. So once you've chosen a scope, and generally the recommendation is start with level A, start with your basic level, and then you undertake that evaluation process. As you go through the evaluation process, if you have questions about, well, what really goes into say exercises, then you can go to the international guide and look at more detail there. Once you've generated your reports, once you have what your global improvement program looks like, and the recommendations that come out of that, often one of the things that we recommend is that you revisit those recommendations in context of what is available to you in the international guide and those toolboxes that are in each of the categories within the international guide. That complement here is what's important in terms of providing you with a comprehensive foundation for your assessment process. And the guide and the manual are available once you've gone into the RETOS application itself. You can find a link in the application to the RPEL manual, to the manual for the RETOS application, as well as the international guide. Or you can go to the RPEL website, the library, and also find it just by Googling RPEL and RETOS. The application itself, though, as I said, will take you to these. And so just a quick look at the application. Once you've opened up the application, you've identified what type of program you're going to assess. What you have is basically a list. It's a checklist in which you can see, for instance, you have a category. So first category is legislation and agreements. Second category is oil spill response, contingency planning, et cetera. It's going to go through the 10 categories. In this particular case, this is a facility level A. That was something that was defined up front when we started a new application and a new assessment. And all these circles over here are all blanks. They're all set to incomplete. The way the RETOS application works is you have criteria is incomplete as a default, but then as you go through the assessment, you can identify it as either complete or partial, or you leave it as missing. And that's how these scores will actually add up. One of the things I wanted to point out while I have this page up is this question mark up here is what leads you to the manual and to the international guide. And the other, the globe icon right here is what leads you to different languages. The RETOS application itself is available in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese right now, and it's being translated to Russian. So that's where you can shift your languages, and this is where you find your other applications. So as you work through the checklist, what you're doing is moving down this and identifying whether something's complete, missing, or partial. And you're going to go through those 10 categories. One of the features that was added to the RETOS application in 2014 was the allowance for you to add additional criteria. So you'll see at the bottom of this checklist, there is a category which is institutional specific criteria. That is criteria that you as a user can add that you will want to include in the evaluation process. Once you've undertaken this evaluation, then you have the option of producing your two reports, a global performance analysis or a global improvement program. So what do those look like? Your global performance analysis is just a summary of what the criteria scoring look like. If everything was complete, you're going to get 100%. Everything's incomplete, you're 0. If it's halfway there, it's 50%. There is the rare option for you to put in does not apply or not applicable. We try to minimize the use of not applicable in the assessment process. But one of the keys here is that you get an evaluation by category, and then you get a total sum evaluation for your assessment process. If you added institution-specific criteria, you get that as a separate breakout score also, not included in your global performance analysis. One of the things that you see here are several yellow highlights. What this tells me is that at level A, where we have critical criteria was either missing or partial, and that's why those show up. When you go through the process at level A, you're going to find yellow highlights identify the critical criteria, and those are going to be reflected then when you have your global performance analysis. On the right, we have a simple radar chart that shows us, again, the 10 categories and where your strengths and where your opportunities lie. The score basically yields an assessment of whether it's deemed complete or in development at that particular level A in this case. In this case, we have a score of over 90%, which generally would be considered complete enough to move on to the next category. But it's considered in development here because we have critical criteria that were missing or partial. And that's how that category is going to work. If we look at the Global Improvement Program, the other report that's generated, this is now a report in which we're identifying the recommendations that come out of the assessment process. When we go through that checklist and we identify something as either partial or missing, it's important for us to add a comment. And that comment really should be not just a comment, but a recommendation that then becomes an action, part of an action plan, which is what we're producing with the Global Improvement Program here. You have what the criteria was, you have what the recommendation is, and that again is a part of the assessment process to make that recommendation. And then it's left blank for who's going to assume responsibility for addressing this particular recommendation, what resources are required, what do they need, and what is the schedule. So this becomes a work plan for implementing your and filling some of the gaps that were identified during the assessment process. This report, as well as the global performance analysis report, both can be generated as PDFs, but also are retained in the assessment program within your own RETOS application or record of the RETOS assessment, which is password protected. It's yours only, but it stays there for you to develop further or to track as you make advances in implementing the Global Improvement Program. And one of the things, of course, is you can always set priorities. The default priority at level A is that any critical criteria missing or partial are going to be listed first. But it is always up to you to be able to go through and identify how you might want to reset priorities. And then if, of course, as you're developing these recommendations, if you want to have and provide more guidance in developing and defining the recommendation, remember you have the international guide available to you through the button up at the top. And so you can drop into that international guide, look at the criteria, look at the elements and sub-elements and the descriptions that go into those, and help better define what the recommendation is for anything that was considered missing or partial. And again, you have the toolboxes, that is all those references that are available and basically hyperlinked, also available to you to be able to step through and flush out those recommendations. So the toolbox and job aids, this was a big part of the initiative over the last couple of years, is to bring in new information, some of the best practice, some of the good practice guides that have been developed, and include those now in update to the international guide itself. And of course, this is a challenging component of any application, is that there's always something being developed. There's always new information and improvements in guidance. And this is, so what you have at your fingertips now is updated right through 2023. And as you might expect, will likely undergo more updates as we move forward. As spelled out in the manual for the RETOS guide, the process that we typically envision for the users is first to read the manual, understand what's in the manual, what the terms are, the descriptions, understand what the different programs are, the different scopes of programs are, so that you choose the right scope when you're undertaking an assessment. Review the international guide, be familiar with the categories, the elements, the sub-elements, look at toolboxes, play with some of those. Once you start to think about, okay, well, I'm now going to undertake a review, I've selected my scope, I know I'm going to do that, then review the chapter in the manual on the specific scope. The manual itself has a chapter for each scope. And what is very useful here is for the user to reference those chapters, because they provide levels A, B, and C criteria side by side. And so you get a very quick understanding of what is considered the basic level, what's an intermediate, and what's a much more mature level side by side as you undertake the assessment. So that if you're undertaking the assessment at level A, you're not digging down, you're not drilling down so deep as you would in a more mature program. Then you undertake the assessment. Go ahead and choose your scope, choose the appropriate level, go through the criteria, add your institution-specific criteria, and generate your reports. Again, what's so important is to make sure that when something is partial or missing, you've actually made a recommendation, because that becomes the heart of the Global Improvement Program. The application itself, whether, we've had the Excel tools available for 12 years, and now the web app for last year or so, now officially rolling that web out. We've gone through beta testing over the past year. But the RETOS itself has been used by governments and industry in over 100 countries on 5 continents. And the tools have proven to be quite useful and helpful in reviewing programs and understanding how countries or even industry within the particular operations can identify opportunities to improve and harmonize response planning and preparedness. Regional initiatives, such as those spearheaded through IMO and IPECA activities and missions, have been instrumental to identify opportunities for enhancing spill response programs relevant to neighboring countries, such as been recently undertaken within the Caribbean, within the Mediterranean region, within the West Africa region, undergoing in Southeast Asia. So these tools have been very valuable in that context on a wide-ranging applications. A long-term objective of the effort invested in the tools described is to continue to provide a current and consistent framework for the assessment of spill response preparedness that can be used by the response community worldwide. The assessment process can help guide developing programs or provide insight into opportunities to improve existing or more mature programs. And then periodic assessments offer a mechanism to demonstrate progress in a response preparedness program over time, and then to communicate that progress with interested stakeholders. The benchmarks obtained through RETOS analysis when we're working regionally, or whether that's in a regional context between countries, for instance, or if we're working regionally within an organization, looking at multiple operations, say within a country, helps to identify opportunities that provide maximum benefit and best use of resources. It helps us identify where there were certain gaps that were common across different interested parties within a region or within an operation. These assessments that use the internationally agreed upon criteria and concepts that form the foundation of the International Guide and the RETOS tool then meet the objectives set in developing and providing these tools to the international community. And importantly, our PEL maintains the application and invites users to provide feedback. Our PEL also plays a key role in supporting national and regional courses and workshops on the application of the tools, whether that's for a single user or for multiple stakeholders, or even in context of regional and multilateral cooperative initiatives. So I invite you to download the tools. You can download those through the QR codes that are provided here. As I said, you can log on to find retos.app online, and you can get to the manual itself and the international guide itself through the help button in the RETOS application. Sign in if this is the first time that you've been doing it, so you're registered, and understand that you provide a password, and that everything that you do is password protected. No one else has access to your particular assessments unless you invite them to be a part of your group. So I thank you for your time and interest, and I hope this has been helpful in understanding where we are. And if you have any questions, I look forward to hearing from them. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Elliot. Sí, ya hay algunas preguntas, algunas fueron respondidas en el transcurso, así que voy a recordar simplemente, todo el mundo tiene acceso a esto, ¿ok? O sea, puede usarlo cualquiera. Por supuesto que lo importante no es descargarlo y poder usarlo, sino tener las calificaciones para usarlo, algo que está descrito en el manual, cuáles son las calificaciones del evaluador, que es importante. También me preguntaban por el tema de los idiomas, como habrán visto, Elliot mencionó, la app en este momento está en 4 idiomas, ¿ok? Español, inglés, francés y portugués, y va a ser traducida al ruso. La guía internacional y el manual por ahora están solamente en inglés y en español, y está siendo traducida la guía al portugués. Pero la aplicación, con la interfase y todos los criterios, los pueden manejar ya en esos 4 idiomas. Ah, acá me hacen una pregunta que no me queda de todo clara, pero bueno, a ver si tú la entiendes. Dice, para ello, ¿qué alcance tienen los ciudadanos comunes predictivos para puertos?
Otra vez, perdón.
¿Qué alcance tienen los ciudadanos comunes predictivos para puertos? No me queda muy claro, quizás seguimos para adelante. Si la pueden refrasear la pregunta, quien la hizo, le agradecería. Eh, Dice, ¿qué programas multilaterales estándar, qué parámetros de seguridad y defensa en el sector naval, en la industria offshore, y cuál es el aporte de cada una de las industrias mencionadas? Caso Oil Spill Response.
Well, there's many, depending on the program that we're looking at. Yeah, of course, there's going to be different stakeholders, whether that's navies, whether it's national governments, whether they're the environmental groups, the public itself, going to the port question. So there are potentially a lot of different stakeholders. I think one of the important aspects of doing an assessment is to keep in mind who those stakeholders are. The more, the broader the broader the context of the program, say a national program, clearly you can have more stakeholders involved. And when one undertakes an assessment at that level, it's important really to have participation from stakeholders. There's not going to be any single entity that understands absolutely everything, the depth of that's necessary in a national program. So we always recommend that when you do something, say at that level, you consider who the stakeholders are and you invite them in that process. And that being said, now if we turn to a smaller, more focused scale, there's going to be other stakeholders and interested, but more at a local level. Same thing. At some point when you're undertaking this assessment, be considerate of those stakeholders. At some point, you would like to fold them into the assessment process, but also importantly, let them know the results of that assessment process and the steps that are being taken to improve and evaluate and make progress always on a particular program.
Ok, espero que haya quedado clara. Preguntan acá las diferencias entre las versiones B2, 2.1 y versión 3. Fundamentalmente la versión 2.1, aparte de que estaba en Excel, y la versión 3 es una aplicación web. Se ha incorporado mucho fundamentalmente en los niveles superiores, niveles C de evaluación, se han incorporado mejores prácticas que surgieron de una sistematización de la experiencia que se juntó luego de Deepwater Horizon y que muchas veces están rescatadas en documentos de IPIECA y de IOGP. Esa sería la principal diferencia. Acá me aclaran un poco la pregunta que no estaba tan clara. Decía, ¿qué alcance que tienen los ciudadanos de las ciudades portuarias por las ventajas digitales y generan una diferencia en la participación de operaciones portuarias?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm still a little not
Sí,
unsure about the question. The application, of course, is available to anyone. So if the question is around, well, what can local citizens use this program to consider what the process, what they think a program is? Of course they can.
ujú,
I think it generally, I mean, this is presented to the spill response community, of course, and it largely is around the spill response community that we would think that this tool is going to be used.
ok.
But that being said, again, we've done assessments where we don't necessarily have a general public sitting in the assessment process, but we have different representative of interest groups in that assessment process. And so
Ujú.
there is a mechanism to get that participation and input into some assessments.
Acá hay otra pregunta interesante, pero ya apunta a la funcionalidad. Dice, ¿pueden varias personas entrando con sus credenciales individuales trabajar sobre la misma evaluación del mismo plan para ir aportando cada uno a la integración de la información?
The way the program is set up right now, you don't have multiple users working on the same assessment at the same time. What is very possible is to have an assessment that is shared. So I may undertake a certain part of the assessment and then hand it off to Miguel and say, Miguel, I've done this part. Can you contribute your part? And then Miguel can pass it to somebody else. And so we can collectively capture everything within a single assessment. So that's quite feasible.
La otra pregunta creo que es más de la parte táctica, pero en definitiva dice, la guía internacional, ¿qué tanto aplica para operaciones fluviales, especialmente en ríos con aguas rápidas?
Yeah, the international guide as well as RETOS are intended to be used for oil spill response. And so we've really steered away from trying to be very prescriptive about a particular setting, a particular environment. It applies to on land, it offshore, it applies to rivers and lakes. The questions are never set to a specific operating environment in that context. What's asked in multiple places is, are strategies appropriate for this operating environment? Do they take into consideration the sort of say extremes in terms of operating in conditions, waves or winds and that sort of thing. So, but the criteria itself is generic, so that it doesn't box you into just, it's definitely not just offshore. Yeah.
Ujú, ujú. Algunas preguntas acá, dice si un sector privado, un puerto del sector privado o una terminal caería bajo el scope de Government or Industry Facilities. La respuesta sería sí. Este, pregunta por las calificaciones que debe tener el encargado de elaborar la evaluación de retos. Está escrito en el manual, creo que sería mejor que entraran a mirarlo, pero una cosa es segura, cuanto más alto es el nivel de evaluación, mayores las calificaciones o incluso más multidisciplinario tiene que ser el equipo evaluador.
Eso sí.
Ah, preguntan si hay apoyo en el caso de bug or issues. Hay un mail de support, sí, hay uno que es retos@arpel.org.i. Aparece dentro de Facts, Frequently Asked Questions, las preguntas que tengan y, si, al final aparece el mail donde contactarnos si tienen alguna duda. Ok, acá ya es un poco más difícil. Este dice, ¿han pensado, have you thought, in English, have you thought about generating guidelines with this same systemic approach for CO2 decrease slash minimization?
Mm. Well, so far it's really been around oil spills. One of the questions that often comes up is, can you use this for hazardous and noxious substances considerations? And even though the application and the guide are written around oil spill response, of course, when we talk about refined products, we're often talking about the hazardous and noxious substances. And so many aspects of spill preparedness, whether it's for oil or for H&S, are captured within the criteria that are provided in the RETOS tool. Clearly, there's going to be technical aspects that are going to go specifically beyond what's in this tool. But I think there's a lot in this tool that can be used for H&S planning as well.
Ujú. Respecto a la nueva aplicación, pregunta si es amigable de usar, si tenemos que tomar un curso para hacerla. Bueno, los cursos se pueden dictar. eh, Generalmente lo que se aplica acá mucho es la integración del conocimiento de los diferentes participantes. Esta presentación, es una invitación para conocerla, son de 45 minutos. Los cursos son generalmente de 2 días, con un día más o menos entrando en los detalles del manual, de la guía, de la aplicación, para luego, junto con los instructores, trabajar directamente en la evaluación de los planes o de los programas de respuesta a derrames que se quieran hacer. Si son de diferentes, el instructor trabaja con cada uno independientemente. Si es de una sola institución y se evalúa un solo programa, se hace una evaluación en conjunto.
Mm-hmm.
Pero van a encontrar que es muy amigable. La
Sí.
respuesta corta sería
Sí.
Este, Elliot, suena importante. It sounds like a good place to emphasize that RETOS is about evaluating programs, not plans.
That's exactly right. Thank you. Exactly. I hope we've all heard that over and over.
Ok. Bueno, creo que acá más o menos hay comentarios, felicitando, agradecemos el tema de destacar los niveles, el alcance de evaluación. Entendiendo que las agencias del Estado son las que revisan los planes de contingencia, eso es otro uso, que en
Mhm.
principio no es el que original que estaba pensado, pero que hemos visto que muchas organizaciones, en muchos países también se ha pensado en utilizarlo. O sea, ¿cómo evaluar la propuesta de un plan de contingencia para una instalación, una plataforma, por ejemplo, cuando se va a dar el licenciamiento ambiental. Y bueno, muchas veces vemos que en algunos casos no hay una evaluación objetiva de ese plan de contingencia, aunque se evalúa todo el programa, ¿no? Pero del plan siquiera, faltan algunos criterios objetivos. Eso se ha encontrado en algunos países que ha tenido cierta utilidad.
Ujú.
Me preguntan acá, Elliot, no sé si tú recuerdas cómo fue utilizado por el US Coast Guard en los Estados Unidos.
Okay. Yeah. There was one of the early assessments that was done looking at sort of a broad scale regional program was an assessment that was done as part of um, a PhD, a doctorate from Maritime University looking at the Baltic countries. And in doing that undertaking, one of the assessments that was undertaken was a U.S. Coast Guard assessment of the United States program, spill response program, and that is one of the things that actually is included in the dissertation that was prepared for the RETOS assessment of the Baltic countries as well, just as another benchmarking component for that analysis.
Ujú, ujú. Bueno, preguntan por cursos planeados, eso después mirará, está un poco fuera de aquí, pero sí, se publican. Esto, como le dijimos, va a estar en el canal YouTube de Arpel, lo vamos a poner el miércoles, ¿ok? Y bueno, creo que estamos un poco pasados de tiempo, así que si quedan algunas dudas, por favor, que no hayamos contestado, nos pueden escribir a Elliot, a mí, a Arpel, y trataremos de dar la respuesta que corresponde. Así que con esto quiero agradecerle a Elliot este trabajo. Esto es un trabajo que realmente
Mhm.
adoramos mucho de lo que trabajamos con esta herramienta. Nunca imaginamos que iba a tener un despegue tan grande y estamos muy contentos de llegar a este nivel y de que todo el mundo pueda usarla. Elliot, unas palabras.
Well, just want to thank everybody for their attention. And as you said, Miguel, if there's any questions or any follow-up, please, you can write to myself or to Miguel or the RETOS email. Uh, and I do look forward to hopefully seeing some of you and the results of this being used internationally. It's a great tool. Very, very glad to see it. There's a lot of people that put a lot of hard work into this to get it to where it is now. So again, thank you very much for your interest and participation. Okay.
Gracias a todos. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.